Okay, great. I'm seeing lots of people into the room. Fantastic. Okay, welcome everyone. This was to have been a parallel session with two papers. Unfortunately, our second presenter has fallen prey to this thing that's going around and is unable to join us. Our second presenter is not well. So we will have only one paper in this session. If you wish to, after the half hour is over, investigate the other parallel sessions and join for the last two papers in the middle of the session, that's completely fine. That's what I'm planning to do. Okay. Also to note that this session is being recorded. Just to emphasize that, I know you've had to click for your permission, but I do feel I should note it at the beginning. Okay. So to introduce our last speaker standing, Helen Hooper from Northumbria University, who will be talking about enhancing university mentoring practice through activity theory analysis of the lived experiences of learning and teaching mentors. So Helen, handing over to you now.
Okay, so I'm just sharing my slides. We did a tech check, so I hopefully this is yes. So I'm assuming, unless somebody shouts, they can't see anything. I'm assuming that the slides are still okay. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here and unaffected by the seasonal bug, thank goodness. And for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be presenting on behalf of my wonderful collaborative team members at Northumbria University. And what I'm going to be aiming to do is to discuss some initial findings of an ongoing collaborative project. My wonderful collaborative team members are all from across the university, from different faculties, different departments, including staff from a central quality enhancement team. But we've got this shared goal of really trying to dig in and explore the experiences of staff across the institute who mentor their colleagues to develop their teaching activity. And we've got this shared goal, this shared interest, because we're really motivated to try and improve the support and recognition for teaching and learning mentors. It builds on a previous project, and I can dig into that as we go through the presentation. So in terms of some kind of general scene setting, I don't think it would be too controversial to say that mentoring to help colleagues develop their teaching and learning practices is considered pretty important, pretty essential. And there are a number of studies which have really attempted to look at the impacts of mentoring colleagues to support their teaching development. And those research studies which have focused on looking at the impacts, there's a general consensus that really mentoring those colleagues really enhances the quality of the learning and teaching that results. Two main ways, and there's various studies that dug into various aspects. So they help colleagues to develop their understanding and their knowledge about learning and teaching in general, but also, and importantly, it facilitates that knowledge transfer. So does that knowledge and understanding of how learning and teaching best practice works, does it facilitate that to be actually incorporated in colleagues' practice? And it does. And if anybody is interested in this, in the citations here, I've put in a really useful systematic review of the literature looking at how mentoring for teaching and learning enhances the quality of learning and teaching that results. Now, in complete contrast, there's a real gap in the literature. And there's very little research that actually focuses on mentors' experiences and their perceptions about mentoring. So what motivates people to become a learning and teaching mentor? What are the values underpinning engagement? Do learning and teaching mentors perceive existing support as effective? Do they perceive their learning and teaching mentoring role as valued within their team, within their discipline, within the department, or across the institute for more generally? And I suppose our starting point for this is mentoring is really underdeveloped as a pedagogical approach for enhancing teaching. The literature out there suggests that mentoring really does enhance teaching, but if we know very little about what mentors' experiences and perceptions are, then that's a real kind of target, I suppose, for us as academic developers and educational developers more generally to try and target in and enhance support and enhance recognition for our mentoring colleagues. So that's our shared goal. So in terms of setting the scene then, I'm just one of a larger group of 11 brilliant colleagues, and we come from all faculties at my institute, a wide range of departments, including colleagues in the central quality enhancement team. So it really is an interdisciplinary group. We're all really quite experienced learning and teaching mentors. We provide training across the institute and within our department, as well as acting as mentors ourselves. And this builds upon a previous research project which focused on trying to improve the support for new academic staff being inducted into learning and teaching. And what came out of that project were a whole range of things which did result in improved practice and process. But what came out of that in particular was the central role that new academic staff perceived mentoring to have on an effective induction into teaching and learning experience. And the other thing that came out of this, side by side, so mentoring is really important for a new staff member to feel, really happy and supported, and for that induction process to be effective, but also how inconsistent it was and how uneven and how different the experiences of new academic staff were across the university in terms of the mentors they were given, in terms of the type of mentoring, and all sorts of things. So that always remained with us, and we thought, right, the next project we really need to try and do is to dig into the mentoring aspect to really get that improved as well. So in terms of research aims then, we want to really dig in and understand the perceptions of learning and teaching mentoring amongst mentors themselves, to identify contradictions, inconsistencies, unevenness in mentoring across the institute, and to use these findings as a good evidence basis for proposing changes to both policy and practice across the institute to improve the support we give to mentors, and to really make sure that their excellent mentoring activity is properly recognised. Now, I mentioned this project builds upon a previous project exploring the induction experiences of new academic staff, and we've utilised the same methodological approach because it is so good. And it always surprises me how the chat, so collaborative historical activity theory, in my opinion, should be used far more widely, especially for collaborative research projects in higher education. It is just so useful, and it just fits the bill so brilliantly if your aim is to really try and drive forward change. So it's a theory which encompasses expansive learning amongst the collaborative team. So it really challenges collaborators to question the notions of your academic agency in terms of suggestion improvements as a basis for change. And it's all about transformation through collaborative reflection. Now, this might sound a little bit complicated if you've not come across this before. So CHAT, cultural historical activity theory, it focuses on socially situated learning, so thinking about everyday tasks. So in this case, we're focusing on the experiences of learning and teaching mentors to try and identify ways to improve support for them and to increase recognition for the brilliant role that they do. And we do that by setting out and mapping a specific activity system for mentoring. So an activity system is defined through 6 interconnected elements, which are listed on the bottom of the slide here. So this is a bit of a busy slide. The next slide shows this in terms of an image. So if it looks a bit confusing here, hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer in the next slide. So there is a subject of any activity system, and we sat down as a collaborative team and mapped this out for learning and teaching mentoring. So the subject of our activity system is the learning and teaching mentor. The subject engages in an object of activity. So here the activity is effective. We defined it as effective mentoring for learning and teaching in higher education. And obviously that activity occurs within some kind of community. So is that predominantly within a department or a discipline, or do actually effective mentors rely in part or predominantly on interdisciplinary or institutional networks or communities of practice? These are very socio-cultural in nature, and the remaining three elements of the activity system on the right-hand side of the bottom of this slide are much more structural or institutional in nature. So you've got a mentor engaging in mentoring in a community, but that is mediated often by institutionally dictated tools and resources. So, for example, what training or CPD is available for new mentors? Is there any further training available for experienced mentors, and so on? There are rules defining that activity. So, for example, many institutions have targets for new academic staff to achieve fellowship of advanced HE, and there's a formal process of allocating that new staff member a trained mentor to guide them through that process. And obviously then there's lots of conflicts and contradictions in terms of how many things do people have to do. So the division of labour, for example, is there a workload allocated for that formal mentoring, and how is all of the excellent informal mentoring that occurs allocated for in terms of division of labour? So if that previous slide was a little bit busy, maybe this slide makes it a little bit clearer. So you can see two triangles. There's a large one on the outside and a smaller one on the inside. The socio-cultural elements of this activity system, the subject, a mentor, engaging in the object of the activity system, which is effective mentoring for to support colleagues develop their learning and teaching, and that's within a community, so it might be a departmental or institutional community. And then that sits within this outer triangle, the three remaining more structural elements of the activity system. So what are the rules, what are the tools and resources, and this contradiction in terms of time available. So how do you spend your time? What's the division of labour? So we sat down as a collaborative team, we mapped out the activity system, and then in terms of generating data and how we progressed with the analysis, each individual team member spent quite a lot of time writing an individual vignette about how learning and teaching mentoring occurred within their team or their discipline. That informed the development of an online survey. We used the JISC online survey tool that contained both quantitative and open-ended questions. So, for example, a quantitative question, do you get a workload? How much of a workload do you get? And then open-ended questions such as, do you perceive your learning and teacher mentoring role as valued? What are the challenges or the benefits associated with it, and so on. And in terms of the analysis, it's very iterative, back and forth between the data, the activity system, to make sure that the theme codes were organised around the nodes of the activity system, and really focusing on surfacing typical patterns and contradictions, because then we can use those as the basis for improvements to institutional policy and procedure. Just checking the time. I want to spend some time on the findings. So again, this might be a little bit of a busy slide, and I'll give you a little bit of time to read these kinds of typical themes and contradictions that my team has come together to consider. And let's start at the left-hand side here. Not one respondent to the survey had ever been asked. So these are really experienced mentors from across the university. And I'm sure, hopefully, I'm guessing that some people in the audience today have engaged in mentorship for teaching and learning. Have you ever been asked yourself as a practitioner, is the support for mentoring effective? Do you think your role is valued? Do you get a workload? Not one of our participants had ever been asked those basic questions about that really valuable role before. Now, on the flip side, I was really surprised by how happy and collegiate people were to engage in this kind of role. There was some conflict and contradictions in terms of respondents' perceptions about whether or not you should be mentoring for a whole academic. At my institute and at many institutes, mentoring for learning and teaching is separate and distinct, including a separate person for learning and teaching as opposed to research. And there are various reasons for that. And conflict and contradictions in terms of whether or not that's perceived to be effective, or whether on balance mentoring for the whole academic is an ideal that we should maybe be trying to work towards. This is an interesting one. There is an assumption, and I think I was guilty of this myself, that if you're good at something, so if you're an effective teacher, then you'd be an effective mentor in helping colleagues develop their teaching practice. And that is probably not so true. And in terms of the institutional support for mentor training, it's very much focused on helping new and relatively inexperienced colleagues gain fellowship of SRHE, because that's the institutional KPI associated with that activity. Very little development, for example, for colleagues who need to be working in professional practice. So lots of really rich data coming in from both the vignettes and the surveys for mentors across the university. Now, just in order to spend a few moments on some initial reflections and learnings, again, the chat theory, it really has promoted expansive learning amongst our collaborative team. And at the moment, we're sitting down and we're in the process of thinking through the implications in terms of suggestions and things we want to take forward to really try and improve the institutional support and the recognition for our brilliant learning and teaching mentors. So something we really do need to work on is to get to a reasonable level of recognition and reward, especially in formal processes and procedures. So, for example, promotional processes, appraisal process, and things like we've got an institutional scheme for professional recognition by SRHE. Can we embed some criteria there for senior fellowship or principal fellowship? And we're kicking around ideas as well for a more celebratory approach. So can we give some kind of institutional prize, or can there be a small pot of funding for CPD or research and so on? And surprisingly, I'm guessing for some of you, would be inconsistent mental workload. So some people had the workload, others were completely unaware if they did. And if they did, it was hidden in some kind of workload spreadsheet. So there's not even a line on a workload spreadsheet. So I think there is a real need to increase mental workload and to get that implemented a bit more consistently. A really strong feedback in terms of this really crucial role basically being invisible, especially the informal kind of mentoring that goes on every single day. So a reliance on going above and beyond and professional generosity. Something we hadn't thought about was what's the best mentee and mentor pairings? Should they actually be self-determined, discipline-based, interdiscipline-based? And that's something that we're going to think about. And I'd really like colleagues' feedback and ideas on any of these. So if there's an opportunity for me to steal some good practice, I'm definitely going to do that and take it back to my colleagues at Northumbria. There's definitely an unmet need for a little bit of extra training, especially for mentors who are helping colleagues develop their practice for professional practice rather than just teaching at a university kind of standard approaches. And what also came out of this was how much mentors gain from mentoring mentees who have brilliant knowledge to share, and especially things like digital literacy. So I'm currently mentoring a relatively new staff who has very little teaching experiences, but absolutely fantastic on generative AI, an area which I know very, very little about. So I think we do have capacity here to promote the benefits and to capture the benefits of reciprocal mentoring, regardless of status or prior experience or anything along those lines. So I think with just maybe 1 or 2 minutes left, I'm probably going to end there. And I really, really welcome any comments or questions or any good practice that you'd like to share.
Getting my screen back. Thank you very much, Helen. That was a really interesting presentation. if anyone has any questions in the attendance list here, please do let me know. Pop it in the chat or just raise your hand electronically. I was really interested, Helen, in that last slide where you were talking about the potential benefits, and you were talking about the mentor-mentee pairings and how these might be rethought, how the organization of those might be rethought. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about how those are currently arranged at Northumbria. Does it vary across department or?
Yeah, so it'll be really interesting again to get other people's kind of perspectives on this. So at Northumbria, even though it's a reasonably large and quite complex kind of organisation, and my own faculty is split on 2 different campuses, really quite large departmental and discipline-based teams, we still have this kind of we have this notional one university approach. But then when you actually dig in and actually go and have a look at what happens in departments and discipline teams, it's clearly not a one university approach. So what's really nice about doing these kinds of projects is to actually find out what happens in reality, regardless of a notional one university approach to processes and practices. So in my own department, I allocate formal mentors to new academic staff. And what I generally tend to do is to allocate a mentor from outside the direct programme or disciplinary team, because then there's no kind of conflicts of interest in terms of a bit of teaching practice going on. And you also get opportunity to share good practice across the department more generally. It also gives the new academic member of staff a wider network outside their initial disciplinary team, because they can draw on expertise and they get to know people from other programmes or other areas. But that's very different to other departments and disciplines. So in some of the more professionally oriented departments and programmes, there's very much an allocate from that specific discipline area, because there's niche knowledge that was really helpful for the new academic staff member to get on board with and to understand. So I'm not so sure that there's a correct answer to that, but it's not something that I ever thought about before. And what I did after thinking about this, because this came out of the data analysis, was take this back to my own departmental teaching and learning enhancement team and say, look, we've always done this in the past, but there's these other ways of thinking about things and doing things. Shall we try something new? Or actually, if it's not broken, shall we not fix it? So I think what's good about this approach and what's good about this method is it stimulates that discussion and that collaborative reflection. And it also, I find this so valuable myself, it's about the academic agency. You are the captain of your own destiny. What are we going to do as a team to try and make things a bit better for everybody? So that was a bit of a long-winded answer. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, it was really, no, it's just all really interesting, isn't it? I mean, yeah, that perspective is really interesting. I see that Richard Davies has his hand raised. Would you like to pose your question?
Yeah, thanks very much. My question really is about the design of the chat system. And I guess my question is to what extent the data confirms this kind of setting out of it, or whether there are multiple ways in which the activity system could be laid out in relation both, I think, to the different kinds of communities and different rules, but also whether or not how you think about what the object is and the output of the and to what extent it feeds into the activity system of teaching and learning itself. And I just wondered whether you had thoughts about whether this was a kind of a strong activity system, theoretically strong activity system, or whether it was a kind of a heuristic and there were alternatives that might also fit the data. Thanks.
Yeah, Richard. So I think this. I think we could talk about that for probably about an hour or something. So this is the second project that I've been involved with which utilised the activity system and this chat approach. And I come from a kind of hard science background, so my background is a molecular biologist. And a colleague of mine, Sue Matheson, who's in the Central Quality Enhancement team, is an educational developer by practice and by research. So she really led on teaching us and developing our knowledge and understanding of this approach. So that's the caveat to what I'm going to say. I've been involved with it for about 5 years. We've done a couple of projects, but I don't really consider myself to be an expert in the field. I'm kind of more of a practitioner, putting it into practice. I think about it as a really valuable tool, both for data generation and analysis, but also for personal and practitioner educational development. So I think I gain as much out of it as what we learn from the participants' responses and so on. So to try and answer your question a bit more focused. So with this activity system, the one I presented is probably about the 4th iteration. So we go away, we have a think, we come back and we draft it out, and then we talk about it. And then we go away, we have a think about it in practice, we come back and we talk about it. And so we get to a stage as a collaborative team. So there's 11 of us from all 4 faculties, from 8 different departments, 10 different disciplines and a central team. And we've got that breadth. So I suppose a weakness, if you can call it a weakness, is I think it would be much more tighter and focused if I define that within my department. But I think that weakness is also a strength, because if you're trying to develop and improve support and recognition for colleagues who engage in mentorship across the university, you do have to have that kind of the breadth. So if I remember correctly, that's about the 4th iteration that we agreed upon, where it was general enough to reflect everybody's practice and understanding, but tight enough to be useful as a tool for data analysis and then reflection. And the focus of this, I think, is to identify those common experiences and contradictions, because that's the basis on which then you say, this is what we do reasonably well and we should fight and argue to keep that going. But actually, these are things that are unhelpful because they're different in different departments, and there's unmet need for training, or it gives you some ideas for things that you haven't tried out before that could be a bit better in your own department. So I think if you take that, here's my feeling, I think if you take that and maybe try and apply it at your own institute, UCLan, I'm guessing that you would come to something pretty similar if you did it across your institute. If you did it in a tighter team, it might be a bit different. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question or not? Have you had the experience of it, or would you say something different? It would be really interesting to find out.
No, I guess Northumbria and you can be similar in the sense that we have quite centralized teaching and learning policies and frameworks. So I guess across the institution, I would think it would be interesting to see what it would look like at, say, somebody that's based at one of the kind of more entrepreneurial universities where departments are actually quite distinct in terms of their culture and activity. And potentially more driven by the academic discipline than perhaps many of our schools are, because they're primarily driven by more vocational, occupational concerns. So I guess there would be similarities. I think where we might look at differently is whether we're trying to provide, whether the outcome is providing effective mentoring, or whether it's about providing effective teaching and learning within particular schools. So the effective mentoring will be a kind of mediating feature, I think, for us, as opposed to, and that's partly because we're driven by, as many are, by OFS requirements in terms of theory of change and impact upon student metrics. And so quite a lot of what we do, see the kind of work with staff as mediating the actual goal, which is the improvement of learning, and to some extent teaching kind of almost drops out as a final.
So what you're doing there is I'm getting deja vu. That was our first conversation. So how tight should be the relationship between the subject and the object? And we ended up as quite a tight relationship, because if it's mentors, it has to be support for mentoring and not everything else, because that's a bit too broad. So that's the, but you go through those cycles as a team to say and to define it. So it's quite a time-consuming process, but it's very valuable because it really makes you unpick and think about things that you might either haven't thought about since you were a new mentor, or you'd never thought about before.
Okay, thanks.
Was there a question in the chat, Claire? I've not been keeping an eye
No,
on that.
no. One of the
Somebody's just got to
participants,
leave. Yeah.
and was thanking you for a great
Yeah.
session. Were there any other questions in the room? Otherwise, I think we can all exit and go on to another session. But Helen, thank you very much. That was really interesting to hear your perspective on that. I think it's really interesting work. So we'd love to hear back from you again.
Well, thanks for listening, and thanks for the input. It's fantastic.
Excellent. Okay. And we'll see you again soon. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye now.